Hello. Before we reach the end of this month, I wanted to take some time to talk about the dragon's Horde. Because we're entering an exciting new phase for the Apophis Club where we're going to start actually doing magical work together. Not just simultaneous workings, all doing things at the same time, but in the same mythic space through Zoom technology. If there's one thing that we have gained from the COVID epidemic, it's the ability to test a system such as Zoom in these circumstances, and it means that those of us who are separated by distance can, by including our computer screens within our own working space, have other fellow workers worldwide present within our sacred enclosure, as we will be present in theirs through their screens in their working space. And so although we may be separated by distance, on the ghostly magical level, we will all be operating within the same mythic space. And we will be having one of these group workings of an initiatory nature every 3 months, I hope. But more frequently than that, I want to do group operative workings so that all of us working together can lift every one of us up to achieve the things that we want in life. And I'll be announcing the first of those next month. But let's get this month done first. This is our first initiatory working. It's a very important one. It's a very crucial one within the Aigesjalm work. And it's that working which takes the themes of that wonderful initiatory paper which was reprinted in dragon scales, Volsungadrekker. And this is the account of the initiate who follows the path of Sigurd. Sigurd, of course, being the greatest of all the Germanic heroes. Sigurd overcomes the dragon. In other words, gains mastery of all of the innermost instinctual and atavistic powers of his being. Because, of course, we are all the spawn of the dragon. And through his exposure to the blood and venom of the dragon, through the roasting of the heart and the venom spewing forth from its wounds, Sigurd gains the powers of the dragon. They are brought into conscious use, in other words. And this, of course, is a critical initiatory moment when all of these latent powers down in the deepest parts of our being evolutionarily are able to be drawn upon at will. Whatever other definition you may have of the word adept, this surely qualifies. As a consequence of this, as a consequence of gaining the dragon's powers, as a consequence of his own heroic nature, Sigurd is then able to break through the ring of fire which encircles the sleeping Valkyrie, use the sword to break the mail coat and to arouse her from her slumber. And in this case, of course, the Valkyrie, as one of the messengers of Odin represents the awakening of the woad self, the divine consciousness within the individual initiate. This is that experience which in other traditions would be called the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. And so we have here in the Sigurd myth an entire multi-layered, complex and complete account of the initiatory journey in northern myth. The paper Falsunga Draco, which as I say you can read in Dragon Scales, takes this myth and looks on it from many different angles. And angles is a key word when exploring this myth. But that's a topic we will be returning to. And the ritual, the Stadagalda ritual, which was included in the book Ægishjálmr, is intended to invoke the principles of the Sigurd Fafnir myth. Now, members of the club will have seen a recent video from me which talks through the performance of the ritual at the end of this month, and we will be having a group chat a week before when we will go over these things again, and any questions that anybody feels they want to ask can be discussed at that time. But in order to deepen our understanding of what it is we're doing, we need to know what these treasures in the Dragon's Hoard are. What are the powers that Sigurd gains? What is it that we should be looking to awaken within ourselves as a consequence of this working? Well, there are several. The first one, of course, the power which immediately awakens in Sigurd when he burns his thumb on the roasting dragon's heart and pops it in his mouth to cool it and tastes its blood. He learns the language of the birds, and it's because of this that he's able to understand when they tell him that Regin is planning to betray and murder him. So, with the language of the birds, we can assume the language of the beasts. In other words, Sigurd awakens to the language of the natural world and the beings who inhabit it. He becomes hyper-aware of his environment and of all of those subtle communications which are flying back and forth around us every moment of every day if we could just understand them. And you can, you know. You can. And one of the purposes of this working is to awaken that ability. I've been reading lately some of the works of Robin Artisan, who I very much recommend. I think from my perspective there are one or two. There's nothing wrong with his philosophy as he espouses it. I think he just fails to touch one or two really deep levels. But what he has to say is on such a different level to what many other people and writers in the occult are even considering, that it's extraordinarily good stuff. But he gives methods in there which are really useful in this regard. When you go out, particularly when you are in a spot where you're surrounded by nature, whether it's hills, valleys, woods, shoreline, wherever, but somewhere which is predominantly the natural world with a minimum of human interference, become very aware of yourself in your own body. Become aware of your breathing. Become aware of your movements, of the sound of your footfalls as you walk, of the rustling of your clothing, of how it hangs upon your body, and how, although normally our conscious mind shuts out all of these things as little distractions, the feel of our clothes upon our skin, become hyper aware of these things. And as you do this, then reach out and become hyper aware of the ground that you're walking upon. Feel its resistance beneath your feet. Feel the solidity of the earth beneath you. But then also come to realize that that ground is not just a layer that you walk upon. It is miles deep, down beneath your feet. And the sky extends for miles above you. And the land extends out on either side for miles. And you are connected to it, and your body is the same substance as it. You come from it, you return to it. You can feel that kinship, and yet your mind, your consciousness is your own. It's within you, and you are feeling and sensing all of these things, and you become aware of the bird song around you. And believe me, if you've never really stood and done that, it's incredible. Talk about stereophonic. It's coming from all sides at once. High, low, loud, quiet, far, near, far. And you hear it all. And it begins to mean things to you. The sound of insects in the grass. Surrounded by life. Life in so many forms. And we are part of that. We are linked to that. We are part of that network. And you become aware that every blade of grass that surrounds you is alive. The trees, the bushes, everything is alive. And believe me, nature will talk to you. The birds and the beasts will talk to you. You will understand the messages that are flying back and forth among you. Just today, I brought my wife to the hospital for a blood test, and while she was in there, I waited outside with, social distancing and COVID restrictions and so on. And I stood there in a pleasant grassy area, just looking out over the hills and trees nearby, and I listened to the bird song, and I watched them wheeling in the sky overhead and moving in formation. And I think for the first time ever, this very day, as I was thinking about this talk, I realized how people used to use for divination the patterns of the flights of birds, and how meaningful it is when you stand there in that connected mindset, feeling the earth, the sky, all of this incredible depth of life around you, how it speaks to you. So that is the first power that Sigurd gains from the dragon. And isn't it right that this perception, these are all things which are there in the very roots of our being, from the foundation of our evolution, as we grew, as our species grew and developed within this world, all these things were there. But with the conveniences of modern living and just getting in your car and going where you want, and it's all deep down below the level of consciousness now. And you can raise it right back up there. And doing this opens your mind to whole new levels of mythic perception. This is the first and perhaps the most powerful of the treasures and powers that Sigurd gains from the dragon. And this is the one that saves his own life as he realises Regin's intended treachery. Now, certainly dragons in European law have always been associated with treasure. They always have a hoard. We can see this, of course, in the myth of Sigurd and Fafnir. We can see it in those stories which are so founded upon northern myth, like Tolkien's Smaug in The Hobbit and his vast stores of gold and gems in the Lonely Mountain. We can see it in the epic poem Beowulf and the treasures which the dragon had hoarded there. And so we understand from these tales that a crucial part of the dragon's hoard is gold. In other words, Fehu, the dragon fire, and Fehu, the dragon gold. Gold which brings strife among kinsmen, and yet gold which can enrich every life when it is allowed to flow freely. And of course, in order for it to flow from us to enrich the world around us, it has to flow first to us so that it can then flow on. It is a cycle. Gold is not to be hoarded, but gold must flow. In order for it to flow, of course, it has to come in as well as going out. And this is the part which too many ascetics forget. The initiate is not supposed to be a pauper. And one of my goals with the Apophis Club now is the determination that none of us will be paupers. We will all use magic actively to lift each other up. So gold, and we might add to that the consciousness to have the wisdom for the wise use of gold. Gold is a power. Make no mistake about it. It is the first rune in the Futhark. The first cause, if you like. The outgoing fire. The outgoing means of exchange. All of these later runes, such as Gabo with its emphasis upon give and take and exchange, this communication which is so crucial to magic, because ultimately magic is a communication. It's a communication from the world within to the world without, or vice versa. A constant stream of communication. But gifts depend upon the proper flow of gold, of Fehu. So that is a power which this working will be invoking. Sigurd also obtains a suit of mail and a sword from the Horde. Now, this was a suit of golden mail. Gold echoes the previous power of Fehu, of course, but gold is also an important symbol in itself. Gold has always been used as an expression of not only wealth, but kingliness. And our path is all about self-sovereignty. We are to be the kings and the queens of our own inner worlds. Sovereign ruler. That gold is an important symbol of sovereignty. In many systems of initiation, such as the Temple of Sets, the uppermost degree, that of Ipsissimus, takes the colour of gold. The importance of gold in ancient Egypt was both related to the pharaoh and to rulership, as well as a symbol of wealth. Not just wealth itself, but a symbol of it. It meant something in its own right. The way it shone, its colour, the colour of the sun, the fact that it was not a metal which tarnishes, it would continue shining. Gold is powerfully symbolic. In the Apophis Club we recognise this in that whereas the first four heads are represented in symbolic fashion by the eye of the dragon against a black background in silver, once you reach the fifth head, it's usually envisioned against a red background, and the eye is traced in gold. So, gold mail. Mail, of course, is its armour, it's protective. It is the shielded self, the self which can no longer be penetrated by the barbs and the weapons of those who are opposed to it. It stands and it is powerful. And a sword with which will can be enforced. The sword, of course, is not just a martial weapon, it is symbolic. It was symbolic in Norse culture. The sword was the prince of weapons. Anybody could have an axe. Axes are good. Axes are really useful. But axes are also tools. The sword is purely a weapon and a symbol of honour, a symbol of leadership. The sword was an heirloom, a link to the ancestors and to the hands who had wielded it before you. So we are seeing here symbols of sovereignty, symbols which are not just martial but also represent sovereignty and leadership, symbols which link us to the ancestors and to the whole long stream of evolution, both individual and familial and cultural, and regarding the whole world, which has brought us to the place where we are now. All of these things are expressed in these treasures of the dragon. And the dragon, of course, is the ultimate ancestor from whose body the world was shaped. There was a magic cloak, according to the Nibelungenlied. It was known as the Tarnkappe. And this cloak was used by Sigurd to disguise himself as Gunther, to win Brunhild as Gunther's wife by deception. Sigurd pretended to be Gunther because Gunther did not dare to enter. His courage was not the equal of Sigurd's. So we have a cloak of illusion, a cloak of deception, the fabled cloak of invisibility, which of course crops up in so many different tales in folklore and all the way through to recent stories such as Harry Potter. This cloak, the Tarnkappe, the cloak of illusion, the cloak of deceit, and this is something that's obviously related to the Eigeshjelm, which we'll be covering in just a minute. It's a cloak because it covers, it disguises your true appearance, which is hidden beneath the cloak. It disguises your true shape, your true features. It can be anything you want it to be. A cloak can be any colour, any design. It can blend with the background, or it can be bright and garish and make you stand out in a crowd. And of course, these are those skills of lesser magic that we learn. More than that, it is the power of charisma which necessarily arises within the magician as they develop. And believe me, you may not think this is true of yourself, but it is. The shyest magician, as they undergo initiation, will accrue a great charisma. You will not believe how shy I used to be. If you've been following my autobiographies, my confessions, there are hints of this in both the first and the third volumes. I haven't written volume 2 yet, but that is where you really begin to see how cripplingly socially awkward I was in my 20s. And yet, as you become initiate, as you become adept at changing your masks to project the persona that you wish to use to persuade people, to cow people, to enchant people, you gain charisma. It's something which is very similar to the notion of harmingia, that sense of having luck as an actual part of your soul, which was so important in the soul lore of the Norse. And this is a subject which I want us to return to very soon, because it's an important one and something I want to develop. So there is this power of charisma and of using your force of personality to project whatever it is that you want to be perceived. And this, of course, is allied to the Eigeshjelm itself, the helm of awe. Perhaps the ultimate power of the dragon, which radiated from the centre of its brow. And of course we've talked about the magical utility of the helm in a symbolic form in recent talks, but it is that mesmeric force projected from between the eyes which strikes awe into the beholder and subjects them to your will. Symbolically and mythically, this is the mesmerizing power of the serpent or the dragon, the snake who gazes into its prey's eyes and they freeze, either hypnotized or in terror, and then it can strike while they are frozen. So, these are the treasures of the dragon's hoard, the treasures and the powers which Sigurd gains when he overthrows Fafnir, the treasures which enable him then, when consciously applied, to go on to awaken that connection to divine consciousness, symbolised by the awakening of the Valkyrie, and the courage to pass through the ring of fire which Odin had placed around her. So these are the things that you should have at the back of your mind as we approach this Volsunga Draco working on the 30th of April. If you have any questions about any of this, please bring them to the group chat that we will be having over Zoom about a week before the date of the working. Just checking on my calendar here, the 30th is a Friday, so we will be looking at about Friday the 23rd to have the group chat, just over a week away. And obviously make that if you can. If you can't, I will record this one because it's important for the working, and you'll be able to watch it afterwards. So take care. Thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you a few things to think about and to consider, and raised your excitement levels for the Volsunga Draco working. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye for now.